So yeah, a little bit more about my background. I am a wildlife ecology major from UW-Stevens Point, from Stevens Point originally. Um, so all through college and then even after college, I worked at a research station up in Stevens Point called Linwood Springs Research Station. So they do owl banding up there. Possibly some of you or many of you have been up there for a field trip. They offer field trips to see the banding demonstration. So with owls, I do have a lot of experience, not only with identification of them, but also handling and banding. So throughout my presentation, I'll go talk a little bit about that. You'll see that, and then yeah, let's, I guess, get started. So today's presentation is going to be on the owls of Wisconsin. So basically any owls that we will see here pretty commonly, we will go over today. So just a little overview of what we are going to talk about today. So first I'll go over some general facts about owls, just basic information that is specific to this genre of birds. Then we'll go over the owls that we commonly see here in Wisconsin, how to identify them and stuff like that. And then at the end, we should have time for questions if you have questions that come up. So with that, let's just get right into it. So owls, they're in the order of the strigiforms. In that order, there are two families. There are the Strigidae owls. So those are the true owls. Most of our owl species are in that family. And then there is the Tyranidae, which are the barn owls. We only have one species that is in that family, which we will review that too. Worldwide, there are over 200 species, so they're a pretty diverse group of birds. You can find them Europe, South America, Asia, even up into the Arctic as well. Most, as we know them, are nocturnal or crepuscular, so they're active mostly at nighttime or at the dawn-dusk time of the day. There are some species that can and do be more active during the daytime. However, most of the time, if you see an owl during the day, they're going to be roosting just because they are nocturnal and more active at night. So something unique about owls and what makes them pretty charismatic to people is that they have large forward-facing eyes. So unlike other bird species, their eyes are not on the sides of their heads, they are facing forward, much like humans. People that even aren't into birds seem to gravitate towards owls. They're very unique in that aspect. They're also fixed in their heads, so their eyes are not able to move side to side like ours. So with that, that makes them, they need to be able to see in all directions, obviously, so they can turn their heads quite a pretty decent amount of rotation. They cannot do it a full 360. Otherwise their heads would pop off and that would not be good, right? So they can only rotate them 270 degrees. What allows them to do that is there are 14 neck vertebrae. So definitely more than us humans. So if you ever see an owl that's alert, like they're rapidly going to be turning their head side to side, and they can turn it back this way to see what they're hearing from there, and then quickly rotate this way. So pretty cool. All right. So I'm going to show this. So owls have silent flight. Unlike most birds, you'll hear like their wing flaps. Owls have some special adaptations that allow them to fly silently. And I found this pretty cool video that I just want to show. It's pretty short, so if I can transfer this over quickly. There we go. This is just a little over a minute long.
To fly over a series of super sensitive microphones.
So commonly we hear those wing beats, right?
Now, it's Ken's turn.
So this is a barn owl.
No, nothing at all. Absolutely quiet. Amazing.
But what have the microphones picked up?
So this is pretty interesting.
The decibel waveforms show the sound being generated by the birds in flight. Each spike is an individual wing beat.
So a peregrine falcon, also a raptor species, but still quite loud wing beats. And now the barn owl. So what allows owls in specific to be able to fly silently are very specialized flight feathers. So on their outer feathers, of each of their primary flight feathers, they have these very fine serrations. So most other birds, like the peregrine falcon or the pigeon, they have very rough, hard-edged feathers. The really soft, bristly edges, what they do is they help deflect any sound. So when they're flapping their feathers, that breaks it up, and it essentially, because they're so soft, there is no sound that's produced, which is really important. So when these birds are hunting at nighttime, obviously it's very quiet outside. A mouse that's scurrying around on the ground is going to hear these loud flapping wing beats come down to it, and is just going to scurry off down in its burrow. So to the owl's advantage, they have a very silent flight. They can drop right down onto their prey, and most of the time successfully catch the prey. So something very unique about owls that they have. They also have asymmetrical ear holes. So owls, they have very large ears on the sides of their heads. Usually it's right on the edge of their facial disc. So in this diagram here of a barn owl, you can see that their right ear hole is a little bit lower than their left. So what that's thought to do is to help with, when birds, when they're up perching and hunting for mice, sometimes they're below leaves or even below snow cover, they can triangulate and specifically pinpoint where exactly a little mouse is scurrying on the ground. And with very accurate pinpoint precision, they can go down, plummet into like brush or leaves or snow, and actually get their prey that way. So that the asymmetrical ears is pretty unique to owls too. Most other birds do not have that. And you can actually, so when I'm banding birds, you can pull their ear flap back, and you can see right into their ear. And from their ear, because they're so large, you can see the back of their eye. So it's pretty cool. So I think I have a photo. Yep. So here's a saw-whet owl. You pull it apart, and then there's a little black dot. That's actually the back side of the owl's eye. So very, very, very large ear opening. So obviously they can hear very well too. Owls exhibit or have zygodactyl toe patterning. So zygodactyl as opposed to anisodactyl. So most of our perching birds, where you have 3 toes facing forward, 1 toe facing backward, or their hallux backwards. Owls, and then also woodpeckers and some parrots, have the ability to rotate their 4th digit backwards. So they'll have 2 forward, 2 backwards. That helps them, with gripping their prey. Owls also, especially when they're young, fledging their nest, they need to be able to climb trees. So being able to rotate that digit allows them to do that. So here's a saw-whet owl again. You can see he's kind of got his outer 4th digit rotated backwards as he's holding this way. So something unique also to owls, and also just a couple other bird species. Second most common pattern in birds, though. So owls, they also eat their prey whole. They eat all of it, fur, feathers, bones, and everything. And then what they can't digest in their stomachs, they will cough up as pellets. So this snowy owl here is coughing up its probably leftover, if it's up in the Arctic, maybe a lemming, but yeah. All right, and then a group of owls is called a parliament. So we got a nice group of burrowing owls there, a species that we do not get here in the state, but... All right, so we will go into our species profiles. So for each thing, I'm going to start off with the owl's call, so you can maybe recognize, maybe you'll see, if you've heard this before in your yard or neighborhood, and then we'll go over some identification things. So I'm just going to be clicking quickly back and forth. All right, so barn owls. So a pretty terrifying scream. Yeah, so barn owls, they don't hoot like we would typically think an owl to do. Pretty loud screech. That if you're out at night in the middle of the woods or whatever and you hear that, might think some girl is screaming. So, yeah. So barn owls. So some of their identification features. They have white heart-shaped facial discs. So pretty recognizable in terms of that. They have a cinnamon gray coloring on the back or top part of their bodies, and usually white with some like tan speckling on their bellies. Something unique about this species is that they have dark eyes. You'll notice in most of the rest of the species we go over, they do not have dark eyes. So barn owls, they like to roost in cavities. They will also go into abandoned buildings or barns, hence their name. Sometimes they will nest also in a barn. So early settlers, when they discovered the species, often they were found in like barns. You can find them in dense trees as well. They tend to prefer open habitats, so they will hunt over, open grasslands or farm fields. So they are what I would consider rare here in Wisconsin. We really don't have that much of a population, if at all. The most recent breeding bird atlas really, I think we've only had one breeding record within the last 5+ years. So if you do find one here in the state, it is definitely a rare sighting. So report it, let people know, because it's something we kind of want to keep track of. However, globally though, they have a worldwide. Just south of us in Wisconsin, they are pretty common throughout the rest of the U.S., down into Mexico and Central America. You'll find them in Europe too. There's barn owls over there as well. So with that, overall, their conservation status would be considered of least concern right now. So a little bit more, their diet, primarily small mammals, as with most of the owl species. So kind of a wide range of, rats, voles, mice, lemmings, shrews, occasionally maybe some bats, rabbits, or birds. So how they hunt, they will fly low over fields, very slow, rhythmic wing beats, kind of buoyant-like flight. Of course, like all owls, they have very excellent hearing for hunting. Typically they're monogamous, and they will sometimes use a nest box similar to this one pictured here to nest in. So I know out west in California on some vineyards, they'll actually put these up specifically to attract them because they're excellent rodent and pest control for vineyards and even I think like apple orchards too, for mice and everything. So that's pretty unique. Our next species here is the long-eared owl. So the male breeding, one long, loud hoot, single hoot. Right. So the long-eared owls, so they're they're a medium-sized bird. They're more of a slender, very tall. They have quite long ear tufts. similar looking to another species that we'll go over in a little bit. So pay attention to the differences here. They do have long, narrow orange facial discs. So another unique feature, they have a very unique brown, black, and like buff, tan patterning on their bodies. Kind of undescript, very good at camouflage, so the species is rather difficult to spot. Unlike the barn owl, they have yellow eyes like most other owls. This bird is a bird of the more open grassland with like patchy woods. You can find them in roosting, possibly in like denser shrubs and trees. Here in Wisconsin, I would consider these more uncommon to rare. At our banding station, we do catch and band some throughout the season, depending on the year and how well their population is doing and if they're migrating south. But for the most part, not a super easy bird to find here in the state. Conservation status, they're kind of on the watch to declining status, mostly because they're very hard to study and track on their breeding. So diet, again, mostly small mammals, voles, moles, possibly some bats, and if they're active more at dusk or dawn, chipmunks or squirrels. They hunt on the wing also, flying back and forth low over fields, so another bird of open areas primarily. Something unique about these birds are they can nest in loose colonies, so they're sometimes, birds, they'll nest within 50 or so feet apart of each other. Kind of uncommon in owl species where they have generally large territories and are pretty territorial. They'll use other bird or even squirrel nests for their nests. Owls do not build their own nests, so often in crow nests is what we find them. They're also, during their winter time, they'll nest in rather large colonies too, sometimes up to 100 birds you can find in one winter roost. So we have the long-eared owl here, so now the short-eared owl. So you might hear this and you're like, oh, that sounds like a cat. Maybe a dog. So yeah, more of a barking type call than a hoot in this species as well. So short-eared owls, they're relatively medium-sized. They have round head with a small, often difficult to see ear tufts. This picture here kind of shows them a little bit. Not always the most visible, but they do have them, so that is how they get their name. They're brown spotted, with buff and white colored patterning on their breast and even on their back. They have more of a generally pale face with black around their eyes, so to me they look like they're wearing mascara. Rather pretty birds. This species hunts more during the daylight. They will also open fields, grasslands especially. This is more of a grassland specialist. Here. Yep, so these, whenever I see them or if I'm looking for them, I tell people look for a bird that looks like a moth or a butterfly. They have very buoyant, flappy wing beats. So if you see that out over a field, it's probably a short-eared owl. Pretty unique. Conservation, so what was once a common bird that I would consider to be in steep decline, as are most bird species that are considered grassland species, grassland habitats being the most, being lost, I guess, mostly to agriculture and development. So if you get to see one, it's quite a special thing. Diet, again, mostly small mammals. Because they are a grassland species, they don't generally occupy treed areas, so these are a species of owls here that nest on the ground, which is unique. All right. Oh, the maps, the range maps, yeah. So these are range maps from Cornell Labs. So I guess this one shows a decent, level of colors. So the red or pinkish looking color, that's their breeding range. Purple is like an overlap or year round, so they might overwinter and breed. And then blue is primarily thought of, their overwintering grounds. So they don't necessarily breed there, but they will move down to that area for overwintering. So for this species, you can see there is a population down in South America that they breed, they stay there all year round. So generally, we can find them here in Wisconsin, especially in the lower part of the state, year round as well. So good question. Sorry, I didn't point that out. All right, great horned owl. So let's go to this pretty common guy here. All right, so pretty common one you probably maybe hear in your neighborhood, or if you're out birding, just a regular typical hoo 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 call. So the great horned owl, so if you recall talking about the long-eared owl, they look pretty similar, right? They both have ear tufts, red facial discs. However, great horned owls are much larger, significantly so. They're pretty thicker bodied too, I would say. They do have a unique, patterning of modeling of grays, browns, reddish, with something that's unique about them is on their throat that is also noticeable, when they're hooting, is a very large white patch. So when they hoot, that becomes very noticeable. Kind of visible when they're just sitting, kind of looks like a little bow tie or necklace. Something unique about this species is that their color tone varies regionally. So birds that nest way up near the Arctic tend to be lighter colored, more white than, say birds that are more in like Arizona, where they're darker colored. This is typically what we'll see here in Wisconsin, kind of a mid color, I would say, between the two, mostly browns and buff. They are nocturnal. You might see them at dawn or dusk, but mostly active during the nighttime. During the day, you might find them roosting, being mobbed by crows or chickadees. So listen for very aggregated, like chickadees, blue jays especially, will just go crazy when they find an owl that's roosting, and that can often lead you to an owl sighting. Or crows, yep. Crows especially. So they are a predator. So when they see a bird, either a hawk or an owl, anytime, especially crows, because they're bigger, they know that they can be bullies. They're just going to keep trying to drive them off, essentially. They want to get that bird out of their territory. So great horned owls, they can, are you saying weight-wise or just height? Size-wise, I would say some of them can get up to like 2 feet. Like, so I've seen some that are about that tall. They're pretty massive, especially a large female. So females are larger than the males. So pretty large bird. Sure. So generally speaking, they're monogamous. So they should, year after year, have the same mate. Mostly they're going to stick around on the same territory. Of course, if something happens to one of the mates, they might find a new mate. But yeah, usually if you're hearing the same birds or birds in the same area, it's likely to be the same birds year after year. Yeah. Yes, sorry.
Why do they hoot and when do they hoot?
Why do they hoot? So great horned owls especially, so right now, they probably will go over this, are earliest nesters in the state. So,
Mating call?
yeah, so mostly when they're hooting, it's mating, pair bonding, so that you'll hear them duetting, males and females back and forth, hooting. Sometimes it is to also claim their territories. So the males will go around hooting, saying to their neighboring great horned owl pair, like, this is my territory, stay out of it. Mostly it's for pair bonding and mating purposes that they're hooting. So if you go out now, and of course it's getting still is dark early, so go out at like 8 o'clock at night, listen for some great horns. You might hear them hooting right now. They might be on. We're getting close, I guess, where they'll be on eggs soon, actually. So yeah, great horned owls, which I think we'll be going over here about their habitat, broad range of habitat, so you can find them in more wooded areas. Sometimes on the edges or in open areas, parks and neighborhoods too. Great horned owls have adapted pretty well to that. There are some other species we'll go over in a little bit that are more of a wooded type species. As you alluded to, yeah, so woods with interspersed fields, they like to hunt in both types of habitats and occupy that. Your backyard, maybe, who knows? Probably the most diverse diet of all of our owl species. So this, we call these like the cats of the sky. Like they literally can kill and eat anything. Anything from small mammals to larger mammals, birds. They are one of the very few, probably only bird raptor that can eat skunks. Manage the smell. Pet or feral cats that are roaming around are also at threat to this species, so keep your cats indoors. Is it only in the what?
Primarily in the evening.
Oh, okay, so the question was, is it primarily only in the evenings to look out for your cats? Primarily, yes, because that's when they're active mostly in hunting. I wouldn't say during the day. However, cats should be inside all the time.
So if you're catching something bigger, they can't obviously eat that whole.
Mm-hmm.
So do they?
Right, yeah, so this picture here, it looks like he's carrying a mink or something like that. He's not going to swallow that whole. It's half the size of his body. So then they will tear it into parts and eat it in chunks too. Where I worked up at Linwood Springs, they have an educational great horned owl. Will sometimes feed her squirrels. She can't quite gulp a whole squirrel down too, so she'll pick at that. And usually that'll last her, 2 to 3 days as a meal, a whole squirrel. Mm-hmm.
How many birds is the cat eat? Is it 30 billion a year, something like that? National Wildlife said? Billion a year?
Yeah, so question was, how many birds do cats kill or eat in a year? The exact number is escaping my head. It has been a lot. They're actually one of the top killers of birds that are human caused, essentially, up there, with window collisions. So cats do really kill a lot of birds. Of course, this bird species being the one that kills cats or can kill cats. Yeah, sorry. So density of great horned owls on like 100-acre plot of woods, it's probably going to be one pair. Their specific territory size, offhand, I can't quite recall. They're pretty large. So for a large bird like this, they need a larger territory because they're going to have a more higher demand of food. So larger territory, they have more options to go hunt in different areas to hopefully catch enough food to sustain themselves. So probably just one pair. Depending on where and like how good habitat is, it might be, you might be on like a edge where, you know, half of your property or whatever is on one territory, half is on another, so that you might have some overlap, but, you know, of course that's hard for us to always say. Yes. Okay, so we just got update. 2.2 billion birds cats will kill in a year. So it's a significant amount, and why in all of my talks, like I will always preach, like keep your cats indoors. All right, so moving on. So great horned owls, they nest in nests made by other species, like most others. Often we'll find them in crow's nests. They will sometimes take over bald eagle nests. You'll find them nesting up in there. Osprey platforms. Every once in a while, a squirrel nest that's, you know, sturdy enough. You'll find them in that. They can nest in cavities. Usually it's like a broken off trunk where there's a little bit of a cavity. They'll go down into that as well. As I said earlier, they are our earliest nester here in Wisconsin, so be on the lookout for them on nests soon. And generally monogamous, as you had asked earlier too. Yep, squirrels, rabbits, you know, as long as they're active or out and about, or even, you know, they might prey upon a nest of squirrels at night. Possibly. I would say it's certainly, you know, flying squirrels are active at night, and so is this species. Flying squirrels are pretty agile, so they might be able to escape, you know, a large bird like that. I would say a barred owl would be more of a threat to flying squirrels. All right, moving along here. Snowy owls. Enough of that. All right. So we had our cat-like call of our short-eareds, and here's our dogs, right? Typically, when we see snowy owls down here in Wisconsin, it's winter time, so they're just moving down for the winter. I put this in because it is a species that is pretty popular when they erupt or come down south from the Arctic. They are not a resident of Wisconsin, so we generally don't hear them giving their mating hoot or call like that. Yeah, which you can see by the range map here. So nests way high up in the Arctic. They'll overwinter further south down into Canada, into the States too. You know, their dotted line is their eruptive line. They've gone further south. There was one several years ago found way out in Bermuda on the island. So very, very large-bodied owl with round heads, yellow eyes that are very striking against their white feathers. So older males tend to be pure white. So if you find a pure white owl, it's likely to be a male, adult male. Young birds and females have black or brown markings, young females being like the most heavily barred. The picture here, I would say, is probably, it's hard to say. It could be a young male or an adult female. A little bit easier to sex them in hand when you're banding them. The species is circumpolar, so you can find them across the entire Arctic, you know, polar region. So in Europe, they also get them as well. Winter visitor here in Wisconsin, as I said earlier. Conservation status, so they're on the watch list. They're considered to possibly be declining. Most, you know, theories are probably related to climate change, as you can imagine. You know, as our climate's warming, their prey population up in the Arctic is also fluctuating differently. So, all right. So you can find these here in Wisconsin, at least during their breeding or non-breeding time, in treeless, large open areas Great places to look are like along lake shores, airport fields, which airports don't like them there, obviously. Farmlands, farm fields are also great areas to look as well. Usually during the daytime, they'll sit on or near the ground. They can be active during the day, but middle of the day, like now, if I were to go out, I would be looking on the ground, not high up. However, usually at about dusk is when they will fly up to a higher perch, like on a telephone pole or irrigation lines. So that's when they're going to be a little bit more actively hunting. So they fly up to higher perches then. Their diet, primarily small mammals as well. Up in their breeding range, lemmings are the most, popular prey items. So in this picture here on the top left, this is a nest with, I think I counted like 4 or 5 chicks with an egg left over, and the entire nest is lined with lemmings. So the male will hunt, do all of the hunting when there's chicks. And this one obviously was a very successful hunter, and this was a large population year for lemmings. So these chicks will likely do pretty well. Yeah.
Madison, they said a lot in Pittsburgh by the march. Snowy owl.
Oh yeah, so I would say the last few years have been pretty good years for snowy owls. This year, not so great. I don't know if they didn't move as far south. That's probably my guess for that. But yeah, last year for most of the winter actually there were 2 birds just out on Lake Monona at the Monona Terrace. Some of you probably saw those. Goose Pond typically has a decent amount of birds that show up. But yeah, on their wintering grounds, they're pretty diverse in what they eat. Rabbits. The ones at the Monona Terrace, I speculated they were feasting on the rock pigeons that like to roost up under the tunnel there. Pretty good source of food. So they nest up on the tundra, usually on windswept rises, so they're a ground nester as well. All right, and we're going to keep moving along here. So barred owl, another common species, almost done. Maybe. All right, so the mnemonic device that we always use for this guy is who cooks for you, who cooks for you all. Probably, if you're out hiking in the woods ever, you have heard this call. They're a common bird here in Wisconsin. So large, stocky, round heads, no ear tufts at all on barred owls. They're a mottled brown with, more of a bar or streaked breast, which puts them apart from their relative that's up in the Pacific Northwest, the spotted owl. So here's our other species that have dark eyes. So the barn owl, remember, also had dark eyes. All the rest had yellow eyes. Common and widespread here, more of an eastern species, as you can see, based on the range map. They have made their way over to the Pacific Northwest, so over up there. They have become a problem species for the spotted owl with hybridization and stuff like that. So the problem is they've been separated long enough where they've become basically their own species, but they are related, so they can breed together. Their hybrids become infertile. And already up there, because of habitat loss and logging, the spotted owls their population is already low. So to have another added thing that's decreasing their population has become a problem. So there are management controls that are happening with barred owls up there to help save the spotted owl. So yeah. Barred owls mostly nocturnal. However, this is a species you can and sometimes will see and or hear during the daytime, especially when they're breeding. You'll hear them hoot, broad daylight too, or even hunting. This species is more of a forest species. They like large, mature, either mixed or hardwood forests, oftentimes in floodplain near a creek or stream or a river. This species does nest in tree cavities or nest boxes. So as you can see pictured up top there, that is one in a nest box. We also have barred owl nest boxes available here. So rather large boxes. You hang up in or mount up in a tree, and they will use these. Sometimes, if you've been here, we have the nest cam of the barred owls that are nesting in the box. So a species you can possibly attract to your yard with a box if you live in a at least wooded habitat.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you prefer oak, savanna, oak woods, or pine?
I would say mostly, so I have found them in pine forests if they're large, mature pines, more so deciduous or mixed deciduous forests. So usually it's going to be oak or even maple. Yeah. So floodplain forest. Generally, this species also is monogamous. So if you have a pair that nests in your yard, 1 year they're likely to be the same pair that returns in future years. Yeah.
Barred owls and reed owls, do they share?
Good question. So do barred owls and great horned owls commingle and share the same habitats? Generally speaking, I would say no. So great horned owls are larger. They are the one species that could be and has been found to be a threat in terms of prey for barred owls. So sometimes great horned owls will kill a barred owl. So usually, for example, where I banded, we have our resident great horned owl. She would attract in other great horned owl potential suitors, and usually we would always get excited when she would attract one because he would help, or Sassy was her name. The wild great horned owl usually would keep the barred owls away, which the barred owls were the prey on the saw-whet owls that we sometimes would, they would go after them every once in a while. So yes, I would say in general, they're going to be separate. All right, just a couple more here. So we've got the eastern screech owl. So that's more of like their whinny call, and then they do have another. I forget which one it is. Hold on. And they also have this, so like their tremolo trill call. So another species you might hear or have heard, possibly in your backyards or your neighborhood, is the eastern screech owl. So these are relatively short, stocky birds, with large heads. They do have ear tufts. This species comes in two different morphs, so color morphs. They can either be a red or a gray morph. They can interbreed and everything. Sometimes nests will have mixed morph colors in them too. It's just a genetic gene thing. They do have yellow eyes, of course. Pretty diverse habitats these guys will occupy. So, in neighborhoods, open areas with patches of woods, country, farmland I've seen them out in as well. So you could possibly get them, in your backyards or in a nearby park. Generally speaking, I would say these are a common species. The further north you go, the less common they get, but here down in the southern part of the state, they're relatively common. Diet, these are also pretty diverse in their diet preferences. Small mammals, birds. The picture here depicts one eating an earthworm, so snakes even. This is a picture I took this last summer. We had some screech owls that nested in our kestrel nest box that we monitor here in Madison. So this is a kestrel nest box. Also works great for screech owls, a great size for them. So if you live in good habitat, or if you maybe see or hear a screech owl, put one of these up and you might get them to nest in your yard. And because we banned kestrels and because I'm the owl guy, I was like, can we also ban the screech owls? So we banded them, and those were the young chicks that we banded there. Mm-hmm.
But it's, the inside dimensions were 4 by 5. And it was marketed as for screech owls, but you may also have kestrels. So I thought that'd be perfect. I've heard them in the neighborhood, but I haven't seen them.
Okay. So with any nest box, of course, I tell people you might get something to nest in them, but you might not. They might have found already a great, cavity that they've been successful in over the years that you just aren't aware of. So you're not always guaranteed when you put a box up, even if they are in the area. But there's a chance maybe their cavity will be taken over by something, or the tree might fall, and you get them in the box. I wouldn't really be too worried about the size based on what you said. It's probably fine. It could be a smaller box. They could nest in this too. So this is a little bit smaller, which I'll go over for our next species. As long as what I would have them do is have in the bottom of the box put in some like wood chips or wood shavings. Okay, perfect. Yeah, because they don't bring in their own material, so that'll be good for them. So patience, I guess, for them.
Some of that.
So with this species, and honestly any of our cavity nesting birds too, what I like to tell people, because I am federally sub-permitted to ban birds, if you do get screech owls or the next species, saw-whet owls, nesting on your property, definitely reach out to me. I'm pretty contactable here at the store. I can give you an email or phone number of myself if you're aware of one. I would love to come out and help band the birds for you. All right, moving on to our last species here as we wrap up. My favorite guys here. Sounds like a truck backing up, right? Now imagine running this call all night, every night, for a month and a half to attract and catch and band saw-whet owls. I hear that call in my sleep often. So saw-whet owls, they are Wisconsin's smallest owl. They are about 1/4 pound only, so rather small. They have round heads, so no ear tufts on them. They're mottled brown with a whitish facial disc, white spots on their head. So there's another species, the boreal owl, which looks similar. But they have streaks instead of spots on the top of their head. And they're a little bit bigger, too. Yellow eyes, of course. Saw-whets occupy a pretty wide range of wooded habitats, usually in thicker habitats that are near marsh or wetland areas too, I would say is a good spot for them. Good place to find them roosting would be in thick, dense, especially conifer trees. You can find them roosting right up along, the base of a tree trunk. Relatively common, so in some good years up in Stevens Point at this banding station, we can band anywhere from 500 to 600 birds in a year. Of course, those aren't all resident birds. Those are birds that are moving south on their migration, but we've had them nesting, in all different parts of the state. Usually if we find them or people report them nesting in their nest boxes. Often heard than seen, so listen for that toot call in the spring. I would say March to April would be a good time to go out listening for that. They're nocturnal, so daytime you're going to find them roosting. Like I said, you can find them. They'll nest or roost pretty low. So if you do some bushwhacking and some dense vegetation, keep an eye out for some whitewash on the ground or owl pellets, and you might be able to find him. Or chickadees and blue jays are also good helpers in finding them. Cavity nester, as I mentioned earlier, so they can nest in boxes. So this box is advertised as a flicker box. However, I would say this is a good size in terms of the hole opening and the depth too, where you can put this up and possibly get a solid owl to nest in. They might also find this size box attractive too. So definitely, I would say if you find or know of somebody that gets saw-whets nesting in a box, find a way to get a hold of me. I would love to come out. These two pictures here are actually some birds that we banded. So this box is mounted up on an old TV antenna, and right in somebody's yard. Their house was like 50 feet away from this. Very unique. It's mostly an open area, but they had like brushy stuff around the box. And the saw-whets nested in them, and then these were the two chicks that we banded in that box. I would say that one's probably about, it was like 15-ish feet high. I would say that would be a relatively good mounting height, 15 to 20, if you can get it that high. You can mount them on a tree too. Of course, then you risk squirrels possibly taking over the box, but. All right. And then, of course, with my banding, many of them migrate south, so that is often where we see them. And here's a few pictures that I took while I was doing my banding research. So this is a saw-whet owl that we had caught. We put on federal aluminum bands on the birds, so it's right on their tarsus. Each of them with unique numbers. So that bird only has that specific number, so if it's recaught or found dead and reported, we can know where that bird went. Banding is probably one of the most impactful ways, I guess, of doing research to find out bird population and bird movement. Another thing to note in that picture is if you look at their second digit, their talon, usually they have black talons. This one had a white talon. So interesting thing there is it just lacked some pigment. And then finally our little, after we band them, we obviously band them inside. It's lights and everything, so we'll acclimate them to the dark, and then when we go out to release them on our headlamps, we turn it to a red setting so it doesn't affect their vision. So this one decided to be friendly and perched on my hand as I went to let it go and allowed for me to take a photo of it. So pretty cute, charismatic birds. So they can see. So actually, if you notice, so the pupils are relatively shrunk here in the light in our banding station. Here, he's been totally acclimated back to the dark, so his pupils are much larger. The red light is not a light that affects, your pupils and your vision. So he can probably see it a little bit, but it doesn't affect how he's able to see at night. So yeah, so that's why we switch it to red. Otherwise, us shining a light, right into our eyes, we're blinded a little bit. So we don't want to release them being slightly blinded, if you will. Okay, so I think we're, right about on time. With that, I thank you guys for attending. And we've got a little bit of time. I know throughout the thing we were asking questions too, but if we have any more, I'd be happy to answer. So will any owls nest in the same territory as a red-tailed hawk? Yes. I would say, so it's kind of one of those things where a size, so let's say you have a red-tailed, you might have a great horned owl in the same-ish territory. They might compete a little bit, but they occupy different like time niches. So red tails are active during the day, great horns at night, so they might be able to co-mingle on the same territory. Certainly a smaller owl, like a screech owl, for example, yeah, you might find them on the same territory. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So the question was, he was down in Florida and saw small owls that were going down into little holes in the ground. So I had showed them way earlier in the presentation about talking about a group of owls. So burrowing owls, they're called. So they are ground nesters that typically they will nest in prairie dog burrows. So they'll go right down into their. I know in Florida they have a program where they'll create man-made type burrows and they'll go and nest in there too. I don't know what other natural or native species would create the burrows down in Florida that they would use, but yeah. Yeah, they're pretty, I would say they have relatively long legs, so standing they might be about yay big. Yeah, burrowing owl. Yeah, so question was, a little bit more info on the bands, like what they're made out of, and whether or not there's GPS type things attached to that. So the federal bands that you see or saw in that photo, the metal ones, they're made out of aluminum. They are incredibly lightweight. Holding them, you can barely feel them. So they don't impede or, they're not an extra weight on the leg of the owls at all. In terms of the GPS thing, there are not on the federal bands, but there are satellite or GPS trackers that researchers are putting on birds. So one project I was involved with the owner of Linwood Springs is with snowy owls. So we were trapping and putting on GPS solar-powered transmitters onto the back of the birds. So this is a program, it's called Project Snowstorm, if you want to look it up. So we can track them when they go way up into the Arctic, see where they're nesting and then where they're going. So there is that technology out there to track birds that way too. Lots of regulatory things, the bird has to be a certain weight to be able to carry a certain weight or sized transmitter is what they're called. And they have to be healthy, and we go through this whole rigorous thing to determine whether or not a bird can carry such a thing, because obviously putting something on a bird is something more than what the bird wants or normally has. So we're mindful about that, but the amount of research that we are able to do and the data that we get from that really helps significantly. So it's cool to have that technology. So yeah.
About 25 years ago, we found a great horned owl dead along. After making a bunch of, we found out we could get that permit. What if you find a bird?
Okay, so first question was, if you find a dead bird that has a band on its leg, what do you do or where do you report that? So on the bands themselves, I think they have their website right on there. So if you go to, just go onto Google, look up bird banding laboratory. It's with the USGS at Patuxent up in Maryland, I believe. They have a really nice forum that'll ask you what's the band number on the bird, where did you find it, dead or alive, and then what you will get as a reporter is where that bird was banded, when it was banded, whether it's a male or female, obviously the species. So right on the band, that info should be on there, but also just, or report a bird band found or something will also take you right to that, their website on how to report that. Second question was, I had it, your purple martins, yes. So you have a purple martin colony. Is that considered like a smorgasbord for any birds of prey, to be honest? Mostly I would say for hawks. I know hawks especially are problems for purple martin landlords. Cooper's hawks sometimes will definitely utilize because it's a large flock and colony of birds right there. I have heard of like great horned owls sometimes being a problem too. So, you know, they're a predator, and, you know, when there's prey available, they're going to take advantage of it. So there's a chance for sure. Just as, same with, you know, let's say you have even an owl or a hawk that's nesting in your yard. You know, the birds that come to your bird feeders certainly are at risk to being prey to them too. So it's nature. Yeah. All right, I think we can do probably one more question before we wrap it up.
In a tight neighborhood,
Yeah.
overrun with a population, clean size, they almost look like hairs, and when they are leaping, going like more than 6 feet. But they're so thick, and when a female is in heat, we've seen almost cartoonish around where they're all lined up, and the males are just dragging that female around. I got 8 or 9 in a row. What could come in and take down that? Need a fox, something that's ravenous.
Yeah, so honestly, red-tailed hawks are also really good.
A couple that have flown in, but mostly they were just for our feeder
Oh,
area,
sure.
which they didn't nail anything. But shadow they threw, emptied it out like that.
Yeah, so red-tail, certainly, you know, like a great horned owl, because, you know, rabbits sometimes are nocturnal too. They're active at nighttime, so a good prey item for great horned owls. Fox, you know, if you have fox or coyotes, I know there's some coyotes in the area. Yeah.
Maybe we can convince the neighborhood association to allow us to put a great box up in or big oaks in the middle of the park right behind it.
Yeah,
And it's wide open, they don't use any chemicals.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, if there's a park or a native area, or even in your own yard too, putting up like a platform for a great horned and just put sticks in it so it's already made because they don't bring their own materials, potentially could attract them to nest in. If you are in like the right habitat for a barred owl, you know, putting a box like that up too might help. Certainly they would be able to take on a rabbit as well.
So great horn won't nest in a box.
This is a little bit small for a great horned. Yeah. I have seen boxes made for them. They are rather large. Usually they have like an opening on the top part too, just to make it easier for them to easily get in and out rather than a hole on the side of the box. I would say a platform would probably be a little bit easier to make and then mount. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you,
Yes,
Brad,
awesome.
for
Yes, I
your
appreciate y'all
details.
coming out and hearing me